Welcome to episode 13 of the Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast. This episode is heavy. I need to give you some trigger warnings regarding sexual assault, violence, and murder. If you're not up for that, switch off this episode now and listen to Monkey Forest Barbershop or Wee McGregor, Batman, and Monty Python. They're much lighter episodes and will probably make you laugh. This story took me a long time to write. For decades, I didn't talk about this trip to anyone. I didn't know how to express what had happened. I was sexually abused as a child, so my attitude towards men who hurt children feels less than human. When this story took place, I was at the beginning of a 12-year-long battle for justice. At that time, I didn't know if I would actually get the justice I had to fight so hard for, but I knew for sure that Nura would never see justice, no matter how hard she fought. Both of us and millions of others bear the scars of abuse, regardless of whether or not we found justice. Our scars remind us of where we've been, but they don't have to dictate where we are going. Obviously, in this story, and many others you have heard and will hear in the future, I have changed the names to protect the guilty. If your ideal vacation includes lounging in hammocks and reading books, Secret Garden could be the perfect spot for you. From observing iguanas to watching hummingbirds, picking fresh tropical fruit from the garden, and walking to the beach, you can do as little or as much as you like. Secret Garden is an eco-house where you can get away from it all and truly relax. Make your booking on Instagram or Facebook at Secret Garden Mompiche. The links are in the show notes. Use the code WITCHPOD for a 20% discount on a 6-day stay. This story takes place in Ukraine. It's called Vladimir versus Vodka. The MV Caledonia chugged up the spectacular Bosphorus Strait and into the Black Sea just on sunset. The lights of Istanbul twinkled on the water as the ship cruised past the banks of the waterway, its shore lined with ancient fortresses, ornate mosques, and impressive palaces. Almost 200 passengers lined the deck to sigh silent farewells and watch the magnificent city gradually recede into the distance. My travelling companion, Matt, and I strolled around the deck as our boat left Anatolia in its wake, chatting casually about the familiar sights of Istanbul before we went downstairs to eat in the crowded restaurant. After a few drinks in a tacky bar, filled to bursting with tourists hell-bent on becoming as inebriated as possible in the least amount of time, we settled into our cabin to rest comfortably for the first night of our 44-hour journey to Odessa. At that time, I didn't know Matt well. We met casually from time to time when mutual friends converged. We hadn't spent any time chatting tete-a-tete and never had much of a chance to get to know each other. He knew me mostly by reputation. One night at a cafe, I told some good friends I was thinking of going to Ukraine for a month for a late summer break, starting with the slow cargo boat to Odessa, then travelling around the coast. Matt jumped out of his shell and asked if he could come. Just coming out of a tragic relationship, I made it clear that my trip was not destined to become a rebound romance. He instantly agreed. From the start, we were crystal clear on what we would and wouldn't tolerate from each other. The brutal formalities over, our budding friendship still in its infancy, we planned our trip. From the Consulate General of Ukraine in Shenlikoi, a newly gentrified part of the city located on the picturesque Bosphorus shore, we got our visas quickly without undue trauma, then went to the docks to book the cheapest return tickets at $150. 10 days later, we embarked a creaky, rusting ship to visit Ukraine. As it turned out, Matt was one of the most easygoing and funniest people I had ever travelled with. We laughed non-stop all the way across the Black Sea. Admittedly, we could have flown for the same price, but Matt and I agreed it wasn't solely the destination. The journey was just as fascinating. It didn't take long for most of the passengers to get into the rhythm of the slow-moving boat, with the exception of one elderly lady who insisted on wearing a life jacket for the entire voyage. As the huge engines chugged slowly across the inland sea, our minds and bodies relaxed. Odessa greeted us with a hot and dry afternoon, and we toured the bustling city for a couple of days before heading to the Crimean Peninsula. Passing through Mykolaiv and Kherson, we decided to shop and have a closer look at Kherson on our way back. Much of Ukraine is a steppe, a level, treeless plain skirted by the low Crimean mountains on the Crimean Peninsula, with the Carpathians in the west. At Simferopol, I woke up in the middle of the night with a full bladder, only to find a robber creeping around our hotel room. When I screamed, he jumped out the open window empty-handed. He hadn't had time to find anything to steal. Besides, these lessons having been learned the hard way in the past, we kept our valuables, wallets, and passports well concealed. Getting out of town, we explored Bakhchai Sarai, the Palace of Gardens. The Palace of the Khan, with its mosques and unique architecture, strongly reflected the Oriental influence the Crimean Tatars had brought to the peninsula. Moving quickly on to Sevastopol, we toured the port filled with huge ships at the docks, saw the huge mural depicting the besieged city during the Crimean War, a monument to the epic struggle for Sevastopol, and went to the Greek colony of Chersonesus circa 500 BC for a peek at Ukraine's ancient history. A picturesque drive along the Black Sea coastline through mountain scenery and natural highland springs took us across to Yalta on the Riviera, with its gorgeous pebble beaches and their long promenades. We were happy to chill out and take in the sights, relax in the spas, enjoy the haven of artists, and wander through the world-renowned Nikitsky Botanical Gardens. Yalta is also home to the former residence of the last Russian Tsar, Nicholas II. Livadia Palace is a wonderful Italian Renaissance-style residence constructed from white Crimean granite. This is where Germany's fate was decided upon after the Second World War. The streets of Yalta were crawling with bald, fat North American men, ostensibly on package tours, but who actually prowled the region for beautiful Ukrainian brides. One afternoon, we ascended Petri Mountain to see the panoramic views of the southern Crimean landscape and the Black Sea. We explored the cave town of Chufutkale, one of the largest cave towns in the region, dating back over 2,000 years, before heading to Kerch on the Sea of Azov to see what we could see before travelling slowly back to Odessa to explore it properly before our trip came to its end. One of the reasons Ukraine has so many places that sound Middle Eastern is because the entire region was part of the Ottoman Empire in the 18th century. In Kherson, we met Nura. We were sitting in an open-air cafe near the port and trying to make up our minds about our next destination. Nura came and introduced herself. Her English was good, and she had a lovely lilting accent with a heavy rolling tongue. To my ears, she sounded like Nicole Kidman in The Birthday Girl. Matt was entranced and invited her to join us. She was 17 and lived with her older brother, Bodan, who worked on ships. She taught herself English by listening to rock music and mimicking. Her family lived in Berdyansk on another part of the Sea of Azov. My family struggled to survive, so me and my brother work here and send most of our money home, she told us, without a hint of self-pity. One day, I plan to save all my salary and go to university to study the fine arts. It was such a common story. I was immediately skeptical and not entirely sure she wasn't armed with some outrageous scam intended to rip us off. One heart-stopping experience with a Ukrainian thief had been scary enough. I kept my mouth shut, but made a mental note to talk to Matt about revising our personal security when we got back to the hotel. During our month on the road, we had become a bit complacent, and it felt like time to tighten up our security. Nura sipped her soda, chatting and giggling, thoroughly enjoying herself. 10 minutes later, she jumped up and said she had to go to work. "I'm a packer in a factory and work most nights," she explained. "It's been lovely to meet you," she added, waving goodbye as she walked away. Matt thought I was being paranoid, but agreed our safety measures had become a little lax of late. One of the downsides of travel is that it can be difficult to trust people. It's almost impossible at times to tell if someone is telling the truth or lying through their teeth. Professional tricksters often have body language so well practiced you can't tell the difference. Giving someone the benefit of the doubt can end in disaster, and not trusting someone genuine could be a missed opportunity to meet a potential friend. On the surface, I was skeptical of Nura, but my instinct said I was judging her too harshly. Kherson wasn't a huge city. I was certain we would see her again. The next morning she was sitting on a bench near the water bus station, tears streaming down her face. She had fought with her brother when she arrived home from work in the morning. For the last few months, he had continually harassed her to become a prostitute to make more money. She repeatedly refused. That morning, he beat her up. "I'm still a virgin and want to wait for the right man." Sobbing and shivering, she looked up with a pale, forlorn face and a black eye. Bodan had gone out to sea on a merchant boat that morning and would be gone for 2 weeks. He warned her that she better be a working girl when he came back, or he would sell her to whoever could pay. She was emotionally distraught and physically exhausted from the night shift. Matt and I took her home and helped her clean up. On the fringes of Kherson, she shared a tiny room with Bodan. Paint peeled off the walls and cracked linoleum curled at the corners, revealing mouldy newspapers underneath. In one room, 2 narrow cots were crammed against opposite walls. A small gas stove sat in another corner, near a collection of small battered pots. Clothes hung from nails on the mildewed walls. A bare light bulb hung from the middle of the ceiling. The remnants of a shattered vodka bottle were strewn around the room. Her drunken brother had thrown it in his rage. When she ducked, he had punched her. Nura said Bodan had been pressuring her to sell herself ever since her mother had sent her to stay with him almost a year ago. Horrified, Matt and I suggested she go back to her family in Berdyansk and explain what was happening. "What can I tell them?" she asked in despair. She wasn't sure her parents would believe her story. If they did, she was afraid they would blame her. She liked her newfound independence, living away from home, working and earning money. It made her happy. She felt useful, and it gave her joy to help her family. Lately, though, her brother's frequent tantrums were a price she couldn't afford much longer. They didn't earn a lot of money, and sent as much as they could home. Nura was optimistic. "At least we have jobs. There are millions worse off." We left her sleeping peacefully, jotting down our phone number and the name of the pension where we stayed. Dragged unwillingly from a deep sleep, I woke to the sounds of someone whimpering and scratching at the door. Kicking Matt out of his bed, I sent him to investigate. It was 3 in the morning. At first I thought it was burglars, but when Matt opened the door and looked outside, I was shocked. Nura sat in the doorway covered in mud and blood and scratches. She had been attacked. She was mumbling and crying, begging to come in. Matt picked her up from the steps and carried her to the bathroom. Immediately, he filled the bath with warm water. At first, she clung to me, terrified. Gently, I asked Matt to wait outside. Feeling helpless and filled with rage, he left. From a bag on the bathroom cabinet, I dug out my little used first aid kit and helped Nura out of her tattered clothes. Holding her in my arms, I promised I wouldn't let anyone hurt her. She insisted on keeping her underclothes on, even though they were as dirty as everything else. It was hard to know where to start. Mud and blood matted her hair and ran down her face. She had cuts on her arms and hands and blood running down her legs. Gingerly, I started with her face, gently dabbing the dirt away so I could get a look at the wounds. After a few minutes, it was clearly futile, and I suggested she climb into the bath instead. She sat shivering in the water while I washed her hair and gently rubbed the grime from her trembling body. When she was clean, I could see where the real damage was. Her face had been badly beaten up, and there were deep cuts on her arms and legs. She had been brutally raped. Wrapped in a rough towel, she sat on the edge of the bath while I bandaged her cuts, then waited quietly while I retrieved some clean clothes. When she was dressed in one of my t-shirts and a pair of old sweats, we went back into the room where Matt was pacing angrily. Haltingly, between sobs and gulps of air, she told us what had happened. A friend of Bodan's, Vladimir, had waylaid her on her way to work earlier that evening. He said Bodan had told him she was going to become a prostitute, and he wanted to be the first to sample her services. When she tried to fight him off, he produced a knife and threatened to stab her. He was drunk, and there was a second bottle of vodka in his pocket. Vladimir dragged Nura to the park and repeatedly raped her, viciously beating her face when she protested and cutting her with his knife when she tried to fight him off. He threatened to cut my throat if I screamed. She said he held her down by sitting on her with the knife to her throat as he drank his vodka. When he finally passed out, she was able to get away. She came straight to us, refusing to go to the police. Nura wanted us to help her. The police won't do anything. They will say it's my fault. Sick with disgust, I knew she was right. The police would not help. She begged us to go to the place where Vladimir had passed out. In the dead of night, I could hear Matt thinking. Voices screamed in my head to run away, but I couldn't. Finally, Matt agreed to go with her to the park, just to have a look. Filled with dread, I couldn't stay in the hotel wondering what happened. I sprung off the bed to go with them. Shuffling out the door, Nura had a hard time walking. We plodded along Tiraspolskaya Street in the middle of the night toward the park. There was an entrance on 295th Khersonskoye Strelkovoi Divizhy Street. We followed the road through the park until Nura led us around behind the lake. When we got there, Vladimir was on his back, snoring up at the stars. He was covered in mud and blood, Nura's blood. In his mid to late 40s, he was a large man, slightly overweight but solidly built. He had huge hands and feet. Nura never had a chance. The knife stuck out of his pocket. The empty bottle lay near his head. He was out cold. Nura could barely look at him. She stood behind me, clinging to my waist, trembling in fear, as if she thought he would get up and come after her again. Matt stood like a statue and stared. I looked from Nura to Matt to Vladimir, not sure what to do or say or think. My distressed mind could only see the red of outrage. The muscles in Matt's jaw worked overtime. I was dying to know what he was thinking, and terrified to ask in case he told me. Finally, Matt looked up at me and smiled reassuringly. He was kneeling next to the unconscious rapist. Taking a clean handkerchief from his pants, Matt carefully emptied the man's pockets without touching anything. He took a thick wad of cash out of Vladimir's wallet, then put everything except for the knife back in its place. Matt stuffed the notes in his pocket and leaned over the bank to wash the knife in the lake. Wrapping it in the handkerchief, he put the knife in his pocket. Nura and I stood still, silently watching Matt, not sure what he would do next. "Can you come and help me, please?" Matt asked. The thought of touching this vile creature gave me the chills. "He won't wake up," Matt reassured me. "You needn't be scared." Nura gripped my hand as I stepped forward. I squeezed back to let her know it would be fine. On his signal, I helped him roll Vladimir onto his stomach. His dead weight was heavy, but Matt and I managed to flip him over. "What are you going to do?" I asked Matt. "Vladimir is filthy and needs to be cleaned up," he said, his flat voice unrecognizable. Matt hauled the massive body of the snoring man closer to the water. Stepping into the lake up to his knees, Matt pulled until Vladimir's shoulders and chest dropped over the bank. Matt let him go, and Vladimir's face plopped into the water, his arms outstretched toward the middle of the lake. The drunkard didn't struggle as his head was held under water for a couple of minutes. My mind in turmoil, I couldn't look away. Soon Matt climbed out of the water and strode toward us, leaving Vladimir to wash his face and hands at leisure. Nura buried her face in my chest and sobbed. As we left the park, I looked over my shoulder. Vladimir lay unmoving on the bank in the same position Matt had left him. A few hours later, as dawn broke over Kherson, we were on the bus to Berdyansk. Over hot coffee in our hotel room, Nura had wisely decided it was time to go home. Matt pushed the large wad of cash into her hands. We agreed to accompany her to her hometown and deliver the distraught girl safely into the arms of her tearful mother. When we arrived, Nura immediately told her parents what had happened, omitting that she knew the rapist and also the part about Vladimir's untimely end. Nura's parents were overwhelmed. Matt and I shuffled awkwardly as the family keened as if grieving. The girl handed the huge wad of cash over to her mother, knowing it would ease their financial burden for a while. Amid tears, we were urged to stay in the village. Reluctantly, we agreed. The following morning at sunrise, Nura's father took off to Kherson to find his son and seek revenge. He was a million shades of angry and wouldn't listen to reason. Leaving his wife and daughter in tears, he set out to wreak vengeance on the men who hurt his daughter. Birdyansk was pleasant, but I struggled to enjoy it. Matt was subdued too, forcibly hugged and kissed by parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and other family members during the course of several days. We were at awkwardness level extreme. To be fair, Nura's mother took good care of us while we were her guests. She cooked the kind of food that sticks to your ribs for days afterward, and also did our laundry. I was truly grateful, but I still felt like I was going through the motions. After a few days, Nura looked much better. Her wounds were healing well. She was safe with her family, and it was time for us to return to Odessa. Our scheduled boat departed in 2 days, and we both wanted to see more of historical Odessa before we left Ukraine. That's what we told Nura's wonderful mother anyway. It was the only way we were ever going to get out of there. The 8-hour bus trip back to the city passed in a blur. Odessa was surreal. Desperately needing solitude, I wandered around the streets alone, seeing nothing at all for a day and a half. Matt did the same, adding a few local bars to his itinerary. "Are you okay?" he asked when he got back to the hotel late that night, a gut full of vodka fueling his courage to speak. Unable to open my mouth for fear of an unstoppable emotional eruption, I nodded silently. I'm okay. Except I wasn't. It was a relief when the rusting Soviet-era ship finally chugged into the darkness of the Black Sea. During the course of our return journey, I dropped enough silent tears over the side of the MV Caledonia to overflow the Black Sea. As I mourned the pre-Ukraine version of myself, Matt sat in a deck chair, glumly glued to his thick spy novel. When we arrived back in Istanbul, we came to an unspoken mutual understanding. What goes around comes around, but sometimes it needs a hand. What happened in Kherson stayed in Kherson. We never spoke of that town or of Nura again.
Hey there, love bugs! Welcome to the jungle! I'm Nancy Miarelli, your guide to the ecological and entomological, i.e. bug, wonders of Ecuador. With my master's in entomology and a passion for ecology and conservation, I'm here to take you on an unforgettable adventure through the mega diverse forests and more lush than you may have expected mountainsides of Ecuador. This year, I'm excited to offer 2 unique science-focused tours. Join me for a nature journaling course where we'll sit in the grass, sketch, observe, and reflect on all the creatures and plants that we discovered. Or dive deep into evolutionary theory on my evolution tour, where you'll see what you learned in a book that one time growing on the side of a tree. Ready to embark on a journey of discovery? Visit www.scibugs.info. That is Scibugs, SCIBUGS, to learn more or find me, Scibugs, everywhere on the internet. Let's explore Ecuador and all it has to offer together.
In the end, I did get justice. The monster who abused me was locked up and died in prison. The monster who abused Nura was killed. Neither of them can hurt anyone else. Call me psycho, but I think dead is the perfect status for a pedophile or a child rapist. I want to make it clear that I didn't kill anyone that night. I stood by and did nothing while someone was being killed, making me an accessory to murder. Soon after that, Matt disappeared from my life. I never heard from Nura again. I've lived with this horror story in my head for over 30 years, and to make amends, I've made it a point to be kind to everyone I meet. It doesn't bring back a body, but it helps me live with myself at peace. Join me next week for a happier story in London, UK. Season 1 is coming to a close soon, so I'm opening up a section for your questions. You can ask anything about any of the stories you've heard so far. What would you like to know? Send your questions to thewitchpod@gmail.com. Do you have any crazy travel stories? What's the most insane thing that happened to you while you were on the road? If you'd like to share, send an MP3 recording of your story or write it into an email and send it to thewitchmob@gmail.com, and it could feature in a future episode. Don't forget to pick up your Who Is This Crazy Hag stickers and totes from Redbubble. Links are in the show notes. The Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast is created, written, read, produced, edited, mixed and published by Ronnie. If you'd like to grab a copy of Few Are Oo, find the paperback on Amazon or email thewitchpod@gmail.com to get an ebook. Also, let us know via email or on Blue Sky at The Witch Pod if you're reading in a book club or a group of friends so we can give you a shout out. Don't forget to tell us where you are in the world. You can visit The Witch Pod on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music and Castbox, and also Substack and Patreon. See you next week.